welcome to Adventures in Messaging. I'm Emma Stratton, your host, and today I'm so excited to be joined by Michael Peach, Head of Product Marketing at Tray.io. Hello, Michael.
Hey, Emma.
It is so good to have you because you are really awesome at messaging. You've been doing product marketing for quite a while, almost 20 years, and messaging is something that you have a real flair for. And you've seen a lot of things. So I'm super excited to chat with you today about some of your experiences and things that we can learn from. So the first thing I was talking to a product marketer the other day, and she was saying that one of the things she was struggling with was having messaging that speaks to two different audiences that care about different things. And she was asking, how do I fit them together? How do I speak to different audiences and then create that other, higher level product story on top of it that makes sense of the two, connects them, is differentiated, etc. And I think this is a tough challenge that a lot of people are up against. Is this something you've ever, solved or experienced in your career, Michael?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's something that I think a lot of product marketers struggle with, especially as they move up the stack, so to speak, right? Like, it's easy if you have like one product that has one particular function and one use case. It's easier to build messaging around it versus where when you get higher, you've got to have an umbrella story that maybe speaks to different audiences, or if you're speaking to a whole portfolio of products and describes the value of how they work together, it gets a lot harder. And sometimes what you really need to remember is, who am I really trying to reach, and what are the bigger goals that they're after, and how can I speak to them? And so a really good example of this is some time I spent in my last role at Lob, which is actually a really cool company. It's an API company, and they've built an API for physical mail, right? So think of like, analogous to Twilio, right? But instead of your API call triggering an SMS, it actually triggers a physical piece of mail and sends it. And one of the real challenges we had in looking at the market and thinking through our messaging was the market to us was super bifurcated between kind of marketing use cases and marketing mail. Like, think about, like postcards you get for Bed Bath & Beyond or something in the mail, right? And transactional mail, i.e. like bills and statements and other types of thing that gets sent. And we never really had a good holistic message that sat on top of two of the things. And that was kind of a big struggle, because we wanted to be able to get into larger enterprise customers and sell to both of those use cases in a cohesive way. And had sort of a moment of serendipity where we were actually at the offices of a large financial institution, which had kind of an internal innovations team. And we're just, we were talking to them and brainstorming some ideas. And I had this kind of epiphany listening to them speak, in that in their heads, there was really not a big line between marketing and transactional communication with customers. It was a ton of gray area. And there were a lot of use cases where we were just sort of talking about, like, at what points in the customer journey do you send mail? And what we found, what we heard back was, there's these different touch points, and they're all geared towards sort of optimizing and improving the customer journey. And sometimes that's in the name of like bringing customers on board, cross-selling or upselling, right? But also just basic stuff like ensuring that people activate new cards in a timely manner. And that really kind of lit something for me, was to say, where we have this opportunity, for example, is not in sort of thinking about use cases specifically, but more going to relevant companies and telling a story about the customer journey, the customer experience. What are the offline touch points in that customer experience, and how can optimizing them fit into sort of a broader digital transformation strategy, right? And then to that came like our tagline for the banking industry, digital transformation for direct mail, and laddered down a set of messages from that. And that was kind of the catalyst where we really shifted our focus. So instead of trying to be aligning our messaging around use case, we aligned them around industry. And we developed sort of narratives for 4 core industries that bridged use cases, restructured sort of the website messaging. And I actually even took my team, which had been aligned by product and then a bit by use case, and had them shift to start focusing on industry. We started producing industry themed content. And it really helped to unlock some opportunities at these larger customers, because now we were speaking in a language that resonated much more strongly with them and didn't seem like kind of niche players trying to talk to 2 different teams within the org. So that was really a kind of a neat example of a breakthrough there. That,
Yeah.
I mean, if I was gonna, I guess the takeaway there is, sometimes you can get that insight for the higher level message just by having conversations and interacting with customers, and understanding what are the bigger problems they're tackling or what they're thinking about. We always start, I mean, you can't help it, right? Because you always start as a product marketer kind of down at the product level, and you've got a set of technical specifications, right, or features or functions that a product has, and then you're always going up from that, right? Like, so what does it do? Why is it differentiating? How does that differentiation provide value within a specific area? And all of that's a fairly easy progression. It's that last level progression to like, how do I tell something big about the industry, or a specific department or companies, that's going to resonate and help to carry through, laddering down to this product and this product and this product, all the way through.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible story. And the messaging that came out of it is just so much more powerful because it has that big view. You're right. It is like a lot of times you're focused on those technical features. You're kind of looking through like a little pinhole, right? And you're missing the wider picture. So that's, yeah, a really, really cool story. Side question, and this isn't, I'm sure there's no data around this. This is just from your experience. When you're in a situation where the pieces of the messaging just like aren't fitting, like this bifurcation, right? That was just proving really troublesome. Do you think that's ever an intuitive sign that maybe the overarching narrative, it needs adjustment or isn't right? Like, do you think that's a sign on some level that if pieces kind of aren't fitting together and it's troublesome, that maybe at the higher level there needs to be a refocus?
I think so. I think that's probably a good clue. I think there's maybe sort of 2 tells, right? Like, if you can't, if someone asks you a question about like, what does your company do? And you start devolving into a laundry list of like, well, we do this for this and this for this and this for this. Like if you immediately ladder down into kind of like your messaging framework without making a cohesive point first, that's usually a good test.
Yeah.
Right. Like, what are you about and what do you do for people? Whether that's, that's the example at Lob, or, in an example, maybe another previous employer, I spent some time at Pendo, right? It wasn't like, if you were asked to describe it, well, we were focused on helping product teams do their jobs better, and build better product experiences. And we would talk at that level long before we laddered down into, and you can do this through like better data and analytics, or capturing user feedback, and sort of the other things that the product or the platform does. And you either have that, like, I think that's a good test, right? Like if you can speak at that level for a little while before you kind of ladder down into specifics.
Okay, so I'd love to know, just from all your experience, what is the secret to great messaging? I mean, how should you approach it to do a really good job?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time sort of thinking about this because I try and, as I with my teams, I try and coach them to build this skill because I think it's one of the harder skills to cultivate as a product marketer. And I was really fortunate to, early in my career, work with and for some people who are very good at it. Um, and so I try and think about sort of what are the best elements of good messaging. And I think it boils down to kind of three things, right? One is you need a narrative or a story arc. I mean, it has to kind of follow that traditional, um, has to follow sort of that very traditional kind of story arc, like um, challenge, opportunity, outcome
Right.
kind of view. And then the second thing is, and probably the most important thing that I always say is, like, I tell my teams, you have to be super specific about who your messaging is about. Who are you talking to, right? Like, you can't have a story without a hero, and you have to really understand who's the hero of your story. And cardinal sin of messaging, your company or your product is never the hero of the story. In a lot of ways, like your product's kind of tangential to the story.
Yeah.
It's not the core of the story, right? So for, like, I'll use an example of my current role from Trade.io, right? We talk broadly at the high level kind of about the democratization of automation, right? And how people in operations roles with, like, sales operations or marketing operations have to date built a career on sort of domain knowledge around specific applications.
Yeah.
But the future is a world in which those applications are much less relevant because everyone's got a skill set to abstract out processes and automation that run across them and optimize those first. Right. And that there's a whole shift coming in business operations where we move from application first to automation first.
Right.
None of, like, I've not talked about our product at all.
Right.
In that situation. And that's kind of the mindset that I think about that, and then the third point is you want to try and establish some kind of emotional connection with your hero. You want to elicit emotional response. I like to do aspirational, kind of, we're going to, and I've always been in B2B, right? So it's like, I'm going to make you so much better at your job.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to help you transform your job and get to, another level, right? Like, I'm going to make you more important in your organization. Those are the kind of responses that I enjoy. But it's worth noting the fear response is also
irrelevant,
a fairly effective one. And you can, as a marketer, sort of lead into, you're in danger if you don't X, these bad things are going to happen. I think to my mind, that's less fun from a messaging perspective, but it's also a perfectly effective emotional response.
Yeah, no, I love that. This idea of just always trying to get an emotion. So how do you do that? Do you get in the mind of your customer? How do you get emotional? Because I think that's something a lot of people want to add to their messaging and they're not quite sure how to get there.
You have to kind of get in the head of your customer, but you also, I mean, you have to understand, like, what does that person want? What are their needs? But I think you can also just tap into sort of broader sets of motivation, right? Mm-hmm. Like, when you get promoted or you get that new job or you get recognized for doing good work, like, what does that feel like?
Yeah.
And, or the same thing, the things that make you insecure in your job, that worry you, right? What are they? How do you feel? And can you work that into your messaging? I mean, I think there's some universal stuff there that is pretty easy to capture, and you just have to be thoughtful. As I said, I think when you fall down, or when you're not able to make that kind of emotional attachment, that's a sign that maybe you're talking about yourself. Mm-hmm. And not the actual hero of your story.
It's very easy to slip into talking about yourself. Even the most well-meaning of marketers can get there. And I think a lot of it has to do with the speed that people have to create things. And
Mhm.
yeah, it can just kind of happen. But this dovetails nicely because we were having a chat earlier about one of my favorite questions, which is what word or phrase would you banish from products marketing for all of eternity? So why don't you share with us what the word you would vanquish from the world?
Oh, there's a lot of bad words that are used in marketing messaging consistently. But my personal favorite, like cringe word is enables,
Hmm.
right? Such and such
Yeah.
company enables um, users to X, Y, and Z. Ugh, like it's just this horrible passive voice
Use that
tense.
word before marketing software. I feel like no one used that word until technology co-opted it for this purpose. Who else uses it? I guess
It's not like, oh,
enabling like a bad habit. Like, yeah, enable, but it's always used.
it's it's used a lot. And as I said, like it's a couple of things I don't like. Like A, I just don't like the word. B, it's inherently passive voice, right? Like there's no action there. Nobody's doing something. Nobody's achieving something.
Yeah,
Um, right? It's a
so
super
easy.
passive word, and I think it's honestly it's a sign, right? If you're using one of those like passive constructions of like enables or empowers or allows, or what you're actually doing, to go back to my earlier point, you're kind of shoehorning yourself into the story at that point, because you're taking agency away from your champion and putting like yourself or your product into the center of that story. And I think it's a good sign. Like if just generally, if you find yourself using passive voice and using these verbs, it's a sign that maybe you're veering away from the right focus for your story.
That is genius, Michael, because I also have issues with enable and empower and allow, but I never thought about it in that terms as an actual symptom of you're making your product the hero, not your customer. It's like, oh, thanks to, this product is opening doors for you that you couldn't do.
Yeah,
It's so when you put it that way, it makes a really strong case for not using it, using more active words. And yeah, I really, really like that. And I think a lot of companies need to think about that because pretty much almost everyone has enable somewhere on their site.
it's endemic in the software industry, and I think like we as an industry are particularly guilty of that. And it's just a matter of like, get rid of the enable. Like, who's your champion? What are they doing? And what is the outcome?
Just start with that thing. Yeah, just go right in there. We don't need to, introduce with the product. Just go straight to that outcome. Boom.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love it. Well, Michael, it's been so awesome talking with you. I've learned a lot from this conversation. I'm definitely going to carry on the torch with enable, and yeah, I'll be sharing that story about love too. It's really great.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Great conversation. Absolutely.